Welcome to the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Edufaith Essentials is an educational podcast that provides essential information, resources, and tips about education, leadership, and topics about diverse learners. Diverse learners include students with disabilities who receive services under Section 504 or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, response to intervention and the multi-tiered system of support, English speakers of other languages, and related diverse learner categories. Edufaith Essentials' mission is to bring positive awareness and promote equity and inclusion in education by sharing information and topics about non-traditional learners. Edufaith Essentials' goal is to restore faith in education one student at a time by empowering listeners with knowledge, because we all know that knowledge is power, so let's be powerful. I am your host, Dr. 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭, sending you good vibes and thanking you for joining me for another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Dr. 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭 here, sending you positive vibes, and let's dive into our episode for today. I wanted to circle back and just give a little why and how I came up with the name Edufaith for Edufaith Consulting. Edufaith came from the letters EDU, which means education, and the word faith, which means trusting or believing in one's ability, having confidence in one's ability. Hence, edu and faith together, you bring them together, you come up with Edufaith Consulting. I always say the goal is to restore faith in education one person at a time. The goal of Edufaith Educational Services is to help families and educators support students who are diverse learners, who may be English speakers of other languages, students with disabilities, students who learn differently. And how can I at Edufaith Educational Services and Dr. 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭 support families and educators? So Edufaith derives from education and having faith or trust or confidence in one's ability. And the goal of Edufaith is to help support and restore any client's confidence or trust in the service that's needed to provide an equitable and inclusive environment for all children, whether it's providing professional development to educators, leaders, and organizations and families, or providing advocacy and championing about services that are required to help support a student and ensure student success. We're using this podcast platform here to provide information and resources to help support families and educators to support students' inclusion and equity in education. So that's how I came up with the name Edufaith. I always say I am a woman of faith. Edufaith is not a faith-based business. Edufaith is an educational consulting agency. And I know there are a couple of Edufaiths out in the world, but I wanted to clarify the rationale of the why of how I came up with the business and the name Edufaith for Edufaith Consulting. Now let's shift into our Edufaith inspirational story. A new cartoon is streaming on the platform Max, which features characters with disabilities. Mark Brown, the creator of the children's show Author, has created the half-hour show titled Hop. It follows a group of best friends with varying exceptionalities and adventures to teach preschoolers to embrace differences in themselves and others. The main character, Hop, is an eager, compassionate frog with a physical impairment. He and his friends address relatable challenges with a healthy dose of laughter, silliness, and adventure. Brown, the show's creator, wanted to create a safe, inviting show that would challenge viewers to understand and appreciate people who are not like them and encourage children to act with tolerance and kindness. He states, "This show is a labor of love, and I hope it brings joy and inspiration to children and families everywhere." Hop is now streaming on HBO. There are 6 episodes that are currently out now, and I highly recommend that you check it out. As a parent and educator, I believe that it is important to foster inclusion and provide experiences of inclusion and acceptance of others in our society. And this show is a perfect show not only for preschoolers, but others at all ages to help support and teach us about inclusion. The show's message resonates with me because I believe it is crucial to teach our children and anyone in our society that we are all unique and that we should embrace all of our differences. The show is now streaming on Max. Check it out. And that is it for our Edufaith inspirational story. Now let's shift to our dates for the month of May. It is May already. For the month of May, these are the things we are going to celebrate. First of all, May is Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We want to celebrate the differences and accomplishments of those individuals who are of Asian and Pacific Island descent in our country, and those great things that they have done to support our society and our country and better the United States. May is also Military Appreciation Month. May is National Mental Health Awareness Month, very important topic. May is also National Physical Fitness and Sports Month. May is ALS Awareness Month, Arthritis Month, Apraxia Awareness Month, Allergy and Asthma Awareness Month, Better Speech and Hearing Month, Brain Injury Awareness Month, Brain Tumor Awareness Month, Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month, Huntington's Disease Awareness Month, Lupus Awareness Month, Mental Health Month, Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month. And then as we shift into our dates, May 1st is National College Decision Day. May 1st is also National School Principals Day. Let's celebrate our principals in the school and show them that we love them and appreciate them as our leaders. May 3rd is School Lunch Hero Day. So make sure that you recognize those school lunch workers in our schools because they are the heroes as we celebrate that on May 3rd. May 5th is Cinco de Mayo. May 6th through the 10th is National Teacher Appreciation Week. Let's make sure that we celebrate and let our teachers know that they're special and that they're valued, and we appreciate everything they do for us in our classrooms every day. So let's celebrate and thank a teacher. May 7th is National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. May 8th is National School Nurses Day. We want to celebrate our school nurses. They are another entity of the school and a part of our schools that help support us in our health. So recognize those school nurses on May 8th. May 10th is School Communicators Day. May 12th is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. May 15th through June 15th is Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month. May 16th is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. May 18th is National Speech Pathologist Day. We want to make sure we support our speech and language pathologists and thank them for all they do with our students every day. And May 27th, Memorial Day. Those are our dates to remember for the month of May. I encourage you to subscribe to the Edufaith Consulting website, www.edufaithconsulting.com. You can go there and all of the dates will be listed so you can go in and celebrate our principals, our speech language pathologists, our teachers, recognizing mental health, and all of the things that's going to happen during the month of May because May is a busy month. Now let's shift to our essential news. The first story for essential news is from the U.S. Department of Education, dated March 26, 2024, and the U.S. Department of Education has recently submitted its annual report on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to Congress. The report, compiled of the Office of Special Education Programs, focuses on children and students with disabilities who receive services specific to IDEA Part C for infants and toddlers, or IDEA Part B for children and youth. The report provides an overview of the progress made by the U.S. in 4 areas. First area being providing a free and appropriate public education to children under IDEA Part B, providing early intervening services to infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families under IDEA Part C, ensuring the protection of the rights of children, assisting states in providing IDEA services to all children with disabilities. And then the fourth is assessing the effectiveness of efforts to provide IDEA services to children with disabilities. You can read the information of the 45th Annual Report to Congress or view the full report for more information. I will have that on the Edufaith Essentials podcast page on the YouTube page for you to go and check that information out. Our second story comes from the Office of Special Education Programs, and they released an updated fast fact reports on children identified with autism. The report, which looks at data collected from Section 618 of IDEA, shows that states reported between 5.76% and 17.28% of students with disabilities were identified with autism during the 22-23 year. The Osep Fast Facts project presents data from 12 collections authorized under Section 618 of IDEA. This information will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. We can go and check out the data and the report. Story 3. The Office of Special Education released updated general supervision guidance and a Dear Colleague letter in July of 2023. The requirements mandates that states monitor local education agencies and early intervention services to ensure that children with disabilities have access to their rights. There are 2 videos that you may find helpful. The first one is called Improving Results for Infants, Toddlers, and Children with Disabilities by Ensuring IDEA Compliance, and it is narrated by Osep Director Valerie C. Williams. The second video is titled Leveraging Technical Assistance Centers to Support States, Strong General Supervision Systems, and that video features OSEP Deputy Director David Cantrell. David shares how states can utilize OSEP-funded technical assistance centers to develop strong general supervision systems. Story 4 is titled Good Job Principles in Education. The U.S. Department of Education has announced new initiatives to partnership with the Department of Labor to enhance opportunities for individuals to pursue a career in teaching. These initiatives aim to increase salaries, improve working conditions, and expand pathways in the teaching profession at all levels, from early childhood to higher education. Both have additionally announced measures to increase access to affordable and high-quality avenues into the field of education. These measures include programs like residency, grow on your own, and registered apprenticeship programs. The Good Job Principles for Education promotes quality jobs that offer a competitive wage, family-sustaining benefits, job security, safe working conditions, and access to career advancement opportunities. The U.S. Department of Ed seeks best practices to uplift workforce resiliency in education. ED will promote principles and encourage their adoption. The article emphasizes the importance and significance of retaining high-quality educators and staff to ensure student success from pre-K through college. This story and all of the stories will be on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. Please go to the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, subscribe, and you can follow the links to access the information. And that will be it for Essential News. Now let's shift to our Essential Knowledge. For Essential Knowledge today, I am going to discuss and recap my experience and my books that I presented at the Council for Exceptional Children's Conference in San Antonio. This year I presented 2 books, Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders and Essential Tips for Section 504 Coordinators. And those of you who are watching this on YouTube, that is me with my Edufaith t-shirt and promoting the book at the conference, which was a wonderful experience. For today's episode, I'm going to recap Essential Tips for Section 504 Coordinators first, and then I'm going to highlight Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders and share the entire experience so coordinators, leaders, educators, and even families can hear about my experience and some of the information that I provided to others at the conference nationwide. First, let's go into Essential Tips for Section 504 Coordinators. Essential Tips for Section 504 Coordinators is a 10-chapter book, and this book is aimed to help support Section 504 coordination at the local school level. If you're a parent, an educator, or a Section 504 coordinator, or even a leader, this will be a great book for you to read and take advantage of to learn about Section 504 practices. As we get started, let's go ahead and dive into the first 3 chapters, and I'm going to chunk the book in chapters 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and 7 through 10, and share those experiences that I share with others at the conference. When we look into the outcomes for Essential Tips for Section 504 coordinators, some of the outcomes that came from the presentation in the book and the conference was to highlight those key recommendations from the book, make sure that we discuss the key principles associated with Section 504 coordination and leadership, provide some tangible knowledge and basics, and then reflect and connect those tips for educators and leaders in that professional role. When we think about Section 504, and one thing that I did want to focus on is the data. When we look at the data, what I did this year was I researched and collected some data from the conference attendees. And these attendees included educators, university personnel, and others nationwide who came to this conference to learn more and support inclusion and diversity in our schools as members of the Council for Exceptional Children Conference. Based on that information, here's the data and the needs when we look at Section 504. When I asked the question, What are some of the challenges of Section 504 implementation? The number one challenge was lack of professional development. When we looked at those other entities and the other factors that may present as challenges in Section 504, the second one was compliance. And then there were others that I took data on, which included staff shortages, teacher resistance, time and support. When we looked at how Section 504 coordinators encourage and need support to differentiate the needs of students and how Section 504 coordinators feel like they can impact students, the data, the number one thing was training. Once again, professional development and training, which was 67.9% of one of those things that the coordinators felt that was needed to support students with Section 504 plans was training. The other was collaboration. And then the last one was resources. So those three factors came from individuals at the Council for Exceptional Children's Conference, which leads to the first part of Chapter 1. And one thing that I mentioned in Chapter 1, which came from the CEC in 2001, it stated that many building administrators find themselves suddenly thrust into situations in which they must be the final arbiter on matters such as strange sounding issues as 504s, IEPs, and decisions such as due process hearings and IDEA compliance, which aligns with the research. Both research topics that I collected data on included the need for professional development. With that said, due to the rapidly increasing numbers and the need for services, the Section 504 coordinator role is instrumental in providing and protecting students with disabilities in the local school building. The data aligns with the needs, aligns with what the Council for Exceptional Children stated back in 2001, which is why I wrote my book and presented to help support Section 504 coordinators and students who require those services. Leaders that understand the importance of well-designed learning and working environments can facilitate the development of proper student placements and specialist assignments that accurately represent student needs. And that is from DePola and Shannon Moran in 2003, page 9. According to civil rights data collected in 2017 and 2018, 1.38 million students received services under Section 504. Well, it is now 2024, so we can imagine what those numbers are like now, and I'm sure that those numbers have increased quite a bit. Chapter 2, I dove into the history of Section 504, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was established in 1973, and then in 1975, the Education for All Handicap Act was established, which is Public Law 94-142. And these acts help support individuals with disabilities and promote inclusion in laws and rights that align with IDEA as well as students with disabilities under Section 504. In 1977, Senator Humphrey Hubert declared Section 504 as the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a civil rights act declared to help support those individuals with disabilities. In 1990, PL 94-142 became the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act. And then in 1997, those acts were updated. And today we now have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and then we also have the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act. That act is monitored by the Office of Civil Rights, which requires compliance of school districts and entities that receive federal aid. Chapter 2 was all about the history, and in Chapter 2, I gave that timeline and how exclusion eventually led to the laws of inclusion. Chapter 3 covers all of those entities and programs that are related to Section 504, including Section 504 knowledge, Section 504 basics, impairments, teams, Section 504 team, compliance, acronyms, mitigating measures. What is a Section 504 plan? What is an eligibility? What are some examples of accommodations? Coordinators must be intentional and seize opportunities to better themselves professionally and learn the basics relating to Section 504 knowledge. If you go back to the research and the data, it's all about that professional development and ensuring that teachers have the professional development to implement Section 504. In Chapter 3, I provide that knowledge to support that professional development. Also included are behavior strategies. I touch on differentiated instruction, universal designs of learning, and all of those other components of behavior, including PBIS, behavior intervention plans, positive support plans, social emotional learning. Chapter 3 aims to provide that knowledge that is essential for Section 504 coordinators. Chapters 4 through 6, I go through it and talk about awareness, coordinator duties, facilitating difficult meetings. So chapter 4 is all about impairments. Chapter 3, I talk about knowledge and discuss the knowledge related to a Section 504 coordinator's role. Chapter 4, I explain some of the common impairments and two of the most significant impairments that I have seen in my career as far as impairments that require Section 504 services included anxiety and ADHD. Of course, there are many other impairments that an individual may have that require Section 504 services. In Chapter 4, I cover those impairments and provide a little background and information on the different type of impairments that a Section 504 coordinator may encounter when working with students. Chapter 5 is all about the local education agency, which is the district. And in Chapter 5, I talk about the role and how the role of the Section 504 coordinator and the local education agency is to ensure that the student receives a free and appropriate public education. Chapter 6 is all about the coordinator duties. Coordinator duties include the facilitation and implementation of the school board approved Section 504 policy and the Office of Civil Rights policies. Also included, I provide just a breakdown of the Section 504 coordinator duties, including facilitating difficult meetings. And in that, I provide about maybe 10 tips on facilitating difficult meetings. And just to give you two, one of them is to attend a meeting and plan to resolve issues when you have those difficult meetings with the end in mind. So have a vision when you come to the table to facilitate a difficult meeting. Sometimes you may not know that the meeting is difficult until you're there. And once you're there, you might have to take time out and identify and assess what during the meeting, what is the problem, and figure out during the meeting, how can we resolve this meeting? And if we can resolve it in one sitting, or do we need to take a break and come back to the table and regroup and come back together with the end in mind and a plan in mind? The second tip I would give coordinators is to structure that meeting with agendas, remain student-centered, and make sure that you inform your district administration or your appropriate personnel, which includes your school administration, so they'll know that there is a difficult meeting coming, there may be an advocate or attorney, or there may be some issues with this meeting, and we may possibly need your support. So that covers chapters 4 through 6, which is all about impairments and the explanation of impairments, the local education agency's role, which is to certify the Section 504 team complies with the procedures according to Section 504 and ensure that the students receive a free and appropriate public education. And then Chapter 6 covers those coordinator duties. Chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10, I discuss relationships. I love relationships. Chapter 7 is all about relationships and how positive relationships will benefit a coordinator personally and promote a thriving school culture of inclusion. When we look at relationships and building relationships as Section 504 coordinators, we want to first make sure that we have that solid relationship with our students, our parents, our administration, our teachers who are going to be implementing those 504 plans, our school support staff, which include our nurses in our buildings, our front office staff, our bus drivers, and then that district support, which includes your district compliant agencies and those that are supporting and providing the information and the laws and district support of Section 504 in your building or for your district. Chapter 8, I discuss how to coordinate with your heart, which means you want to cultivate a culture so that you lead and everyone knows, from your parents to your students to your administration, that everyone is valued and respected. And that just aligns with positive relationships. So you want to make sure you have positive relationships, but you also want to make sure that you coordinate with your heart and have empathy and value and respect everyone that you're coming in contact with as you coordinate Section 504. The next chapter covers ethical leadership. Section 504 is very litigious, and one big factor is compliance and adhering of federal laws. In that chapter, I discussed the importance of following guidance, following rules, following regulations to make sure that you stay in compliance and that you're acting as an ethical coordinator in the role. The final chapter covers essential tips for coordinators. And in that chapter, I highlight a plethora of essential tips. And one essential tip that I would just give you right now is for coordinators to leverage and seize opportunities where you can improve your knowledge and practices through teachable moments. everything takes time. And when you're in that role of Section 504 coordinator, you have to make sure that you adjust and can manage all of those moving parts, but you're learning because every day there's going to be something different, something new, that you remain student-centered, relationship-centered, ethical, and adhere to those laws. Throughout the book, I talk about all of those things that will help support you as a Section 504 coordinator, as a teacher, or even as a leader who might be leading Section 504 coordination. And that will cover it for essential tips for Section 504 coordinator. The other book that I discuss as we shift into our next session of essential knowledge is Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders. And those of you who are viewing the YouTube page, that is a picture of me. And I am at the CEC conference with my hands up because I am excited to be there. And the second book I presented on was Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders, which was my first book. Let's dive in and have a little recap of essential tips for special education leaders. The first 3 chapters, I discuss history and the excitement I had when I first got my leadership job when I relocated to Georgia. And I thought I knew everything until I got into the role and I realized that special education is the same, but it's also very different in varying areas. And I had to learn a lot when I was in that role. I was a district leader in Florida, but I had to learn more information again and readjust again and create some task-driven outcomes as I tried to facilitate, manage people, families, students, instructional leadership at the school level as a special education leader. Chapters 1 through 3, I discuss once again the data and the need. And one thing that I want to present here is currently 14.7% of students were identified as special education in 2011 and 2012. Now, I know this data is a little bit dated, but if you think about that now, 14% of students, think about the numbers now in 2024 and how those numbers have increased. There were 66.17% of children ages 5 through 21 received those services inside of a regular education class, which was 80% of the school day. When we think about students who were in a separate school or a small group class, those numbers were 12.64% of children from ages 5 through 21, which means that a majority of students who are identified under IDEA as students with disabilities were in regular classes, which means that general education teachers, special education teachers, and leaders all had an impact and influence in saw students in those classes in the least restrictive environment. Chapter 1, I discussed the data and the need. And as I shifted it, I also want to point out what I researched at the CEC conference. I took data at the conference as well for special education leaders. And 2 questions I asked the participants at the conference included, what were some challenges that special education leaders encounter today in 2024? And the number one thing was staffing, trying to retain quality teachers and staffing. The second was other, and that just included a lot of different things, a lot of different factors. But the next thing, the third one was once again professional development. Professional development was a big one, and that was a 3. And then lack of funding and resources, and then compliance. And then when we think of other, those categories included teacher training, some of compliance, teacher retention, and just other just factors because that was an open field. And so individuals wrote in some of the answers from there. Some of it included district support, district understanding, understanding the law, which kind of pivoted into professional development. But one of the number one challenges that special education leaders face in schools today, staffing, teacher shortage. And then the other question that I asked everyone at the conference was, do you feel that special education leadership is different? And 265 participants on the first day said yes. And 22 said no. And as I got those numbers and those numbers grew, the overall feel for those individuals at the conference was yes, that special education leadership is different. The majority said they felt that special education leadership is different. Hence is why I wrote the book, because it is different. And that's what I learned when I transitioned into that position in Georgia at the school level, that I was a part of the administration team, but my administration and my leadership looked different than the others. I did everything that the others did, but then there were some additional duties that had to be managed under IDEA compliance, and special education, which is why I wrote Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders. Some ways to be successful in the role when you are overwhelmed and sustain the position is to create some fundamental task-oriented short-term goals that you can manage daily, monthly, weekly to be supportive, and then establish your support team. See who your key players are who are going to help you be successful in that role and establish that support team and start building on that team to gain the knowledge to be successful and sustain that position in your building. Chapter 2 is my history chapter. And some things I'll point out in chapter 2 is the fact that students who had disabilities in the 1800s were forced to stay home, which meant they were excluded and they weren't even allowed to come to school. And then over time, through the evolution in 1975, the Education for All Handicap Act, Public Law 94-142, was established, which promoted inclusion and inclusive practices and for students with disabilities to be a part of the schools and be a part of classrooms. And from that came the generation of the individual education plan to document those services. Some additional history timelines that I point out in chapter 2 include in 1990 that Public Law 94-142 became what we now know as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Americans with Disability Act. So when I say IDEA, I am saying PL 94-142, which is the Education for All Handicap Act that was established in 1975. And the purpose of all of that information in the history in chapter 2 is for my leaders, based on what you know about the history, how are you going to impact the future? And that's what I like to leave leaders with in chapter 2. Chapter 3 is all about relationships. I feel like as a leader and in my career, relationships are the number one thing or the number one goals that leaders should have because those relationships directly impact student achievement. In chapter 3, I discuss the value of relationship and give some research and some background on the meaning and the value of relationships, and not only special education leadership, but in leadership and in teaching in general. Effective administrators know how to build those positive relationships. And when you think about relationships and the importance, you have to make sure that you have, number one, your relationship with students, your relationship with parents, your administration team, your teachers. They're very important, school staff, the district support, all of those strong relationships impact student achievement. And we want to make sure that you have that village around you and you have those relationships because you're going to need all those key players to be successful in the role. Chapter 4 is all about knowledge. Knowledge is essential. And in that chapter, I discuss all types of knowledge that is important in the role of Section 504, which includes the IEP, how to read an IEP, the parts of an IEP, Section 504, the differences between Section 504 and the individual education plan and IDEA services, the multi-tier system of support. I mentioned that in both books in chapters. Both chapters with knowledge, I mentioned the MTSS process and RTI process. I discussed positive behavior support, related services, behavior in general, and behavior support such as PBIS, positive support plans, behavior intervention plans, social emotional learning. I discussed some common acronyms and provide definitions for those acronyms, discuss differentiated instruction, the universal design of learning, and other things that are essential to be successful as a special education leader. Chapters 5 through 7. Chapter 5, I touch on the local education agency and those related agencies. I discuss the role of the local education agency. The role of the LEA adding meeting is to offer the free and appropriate public education. In Chapter 5, I also discuss case law and some pivotal cases that are related to students with disabilities. I provide some tips for facilitating difficult meetings because when you're a special education leader, you will in fact have to facilitate difficult meetings. So I provide some tips. And 2 tips I would just give you right off the bat. Review the child's records. Make sure that you are familiar with the child that you are going to be facilitating the meeting on and have all the data and all the parent records and parent concerns and teacher information and grades and attendance and psych. Make sure you review all that and have that at the table. The second tip I would give you is to conduct a preparatory activity meeting. A preparatory activity meeting is a meeting where you meet ahead of time to sit down with the staff and faculty to develop a plan of action, make sure that all the data is there, and to ensure that there is a smooth flow of the meeting, ensure that you have an agenda and that you have done those things to prepare the meeting so the meeting is facilitated and you facilitate the meeting as smooth as possible. My leaders, when you're looking at ways to facilitate those difficult meetings, reviewing records and data and having it at the table, and then having a prep meeting to make sure that you have a flow to ensure that everything happens according to your vision to remain student-centered with the end in mind and a resolution in mind. Chapters 6 and 7 is all about resiliency and confidence as a leader. And one thing I want to point out that strong leaders understand the importance of resiliency in school leadership. In that chapter, I discuss 6 research traits of resilient leaders and the importance of confidence. Confidence is the ability to trust yourself enough to step out on faith, make decisions, and connect with others to use your influential powers to make an impact. In that chapter, I also highlight some of Bandura's theory on efficacy and how if you have efficacy and when you have that confidence and that resiliency, others will follow you. Chapter 8 is the second largest chapter because having a team and building a team is essential as a leader, whether you're in special education leadership or not. In that chapter, I highlight 10 team building traits. Establish a vision and goals for what you want to do, and then make sure that you're adequately communicating because communication is the key and communication is really pivotal in any organization. So that's chapter 8. Chapter 9, I pivot into how to lead with your heart. And in chapter 9, I highlight the impact of having that heart leadership, making sure that you have empathy when you're leading others, making sure that you once again cultivate a culture where others know you value and appreciate their contributions. And I feel like leading with your heart is very important in leadership. Maya Angelou has a quote about the way that you make people feel. And I feel like that quote is very relatable because people will remember how you made them feel versus anything else. Chapter 9 talks about the impact of leading with your heart, valuing others, having empathy. Everyone that you lead, you want to make sure that you're leading with your heart. Chapter 10 covers ethical leadership and compliance. Special education is very litigious. There are a lot of cases. There are a lot of regulations, laws, and rules with special education, and it can be intimidating. Chapter 10 discusses the value of ethical leadership. I highlight 6 ethical leadership traits, which include that leaders are humble, they fulfill commitments, and they show respect. In that chapter, additionally, I talk about the value of compliance and adhering to federal laws, regulations, and guidelines and deadline dates when you're looking into special education leadership and compliance and remaining ethical. The last chapter is all about tips. It's your call to action. In that chapter, I provide essential tips for leaders and to leave you with 2 tips for today. Focus on your success and learn from your mistakes because you are going to make mistakes and it's okay. But also focus on those good things you've done as well. So don't always harbor on the mistakes. Let the mistake be a lesson, but focus on those good things that you've done and look at your evolution from where you start to where you finish. And then the last tip I will leave for the leaders will be to set some attainable goals and check those boxes. You may not be able to accomplish everything, but if you have a vision and you set some long-term and short-term goals over time, as you are leading, you will see that you are checking some of those boxes, even the little things such as being more visible in the hallway, fist bumping 10 students to let them know that you care about them. So start small. As a leader, build your team, use the history to impact the future, build your relationships, gain that knowledge, learn all those programs that are related to special education services, know your role as a local education agency, lead with confidence, build your team, lead with your heart, be resilient, and remain ethical. Make sure you stay in compliance with laws, and then focus on success and learn from your mistakes. So those are my tips and my information for my essential tips for special education leaders. My essential tips for educators, leaders, and anyone listening to this podcast, whether you're a parent, educator, or leader, is to know your student, immerse yourself in Section 504 and special education practices within your purview, seek professional development, ask your leaders, ask your leader, make sure that you're seeking those professional development services that are going to build your efficacy, your confidence, and help you sustain the role and be successful because you have the background knowledge. And then make sure that you ask for help. It's okay to ask for help at any time, in any time of your career. I have been in teaching over 20 years, and I still ask for help. And it's okay to ask for help and seek others for guidance and support. And then my final two tips for leaders, educators, and parents: subscribe to the Edufaith website at www.edufaithconsulting.com, because that is some professional development, and that will immerse you in Section 504 and special education with resources and information I have. And then purchase the book. Purchase both books. Give a copy to a friend, purchase a copy for yourself. They're available in Kindle version and they're in paperback version on Amazon. So my tips for leaders: know your students, immerse yourself, seek professional development, ask for help, purchase the books, and subscribe to Edufaith Consulting. If you are watching the YouTube video, here are just some pictures and some photos of the great time that I had at the CEC conference and those individuals that I was able to connect with and share with and present to. Thank you to all those who came by to my session to support me, purchase my book, and learn more about essential tips for special education leaders and essential tips for Section 504 coordinators. And yes, in one of those pictures, my dad came to support me. My dad is in the picture. So thank you, Daddy, for being there. Eggman Simmons. Thank you to my other friends and family who came by to support me, as well as my husband who helped promote my session. Shout out to Texas A&M University and Darlene and Luis, my new friends that I made who are grad students at Texas A&M University. They also had lunch with me. I enjoyed the new friendships, and thank you all for coming by my session, as well as I want to shout out the Cobb County School District teachers and leaders who came to my session to help support me and show me love at the session. Thank you all for making my CEC conference experience memorable. Now it's time for our book excerpt for today. And I'm not going to provide a book excerpt because I just described two books. My book excerpt is to purchase a copy of Essential Tips for Section 504 coordinators and a copy of Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders. No book excerpt for today, but just know, once again, those books are available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback version. Get your copy. And if you don't want to read the large book, buy it, give it to an educator friend, give it to a parent. I also have my Essential Tips for Parents book that are available for parents. And then I have those abbreviated version of Section 504 services and IEP services, and the Essentials of IEP 101, which is less than 50 pages, and the Essentials of Section 504, which is also less than 50 pages. Just a quick read about the programs. And then I also have Essential Tips for Educators. So grab your copy on Amazon and get Essential. It starts with you. My call to action for you is just to remind you that Edufaith has a monthly newsletter and a blog. In that newsletter, I provide information about the dates and just announcements and everything that's going on with Edufaith. So make sure that you subscribe at www.edufaithconsulting.com and subscribe to the Edufaith Consulting YouTube page. I am looking for subscribers on both on the website and on YouTube. Thank you for all that you've done so far, and thank you for your support.
You've got mail.
Now it's time for our essential advice. And this letter came from a parent, and her child currently has an individual education plan. And that student is in the middle school. However, the student's grades are not doing well. The student has an IEP for ADHD under other health impairment, and the teachers are penalizing that student for late work. They're not providing a copy of the notes, and just some of things that are happening are aligned with the executive functioning component of ADHD, and the student is not doing well. And the parent wrote me because she is getting ready to attend an IEP meeting to address these concerns and wanted to know the best way to address the concerns. So we broke down the concerns list by list, and I'm just going to give you just a recap of 3 things that she saw that was going on and that we rectified, because she went to the meeting and asked for these things and advocated for her child, and she was able to get some resolution and some results for the services. The first thing was the student was turning in late work, and the student was being penalized for late work. Well, he really wasn't turning in work. He was adhering to the extended time. So I mentioned to her how it would be problematic for a school to penalize a student for turning in an assignment a day late. Let me clarify, when they in fact have extended time 50%, which aligns with their accommodation. During the meeting, I told her to address the fact that how are we penalizing him when he has an accommodation of extended time. Following that conversation and advocating at the meeting, the school made some changes and they counted those assignments and they adhered to the IEP, in which those assignments that he was being penalized for were no longer a penalty because he was using his accommodation of extended time. So that problem was resolved and that student's grade went up. The other thing she was asking about and that she had a concern with was him not turning in assignment. And that is something that's very common with students with ADHD. They'll do the work and then they don't turn the work in. And one accommodation that I proposed to her was to see if she could have the student email the assignments, or for her to email the assignments, so that we know that she scanned a copy, she provided a copy, and the assignment made it to school. Because sometimes students with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, have those executive functioning issues, and organization and submitting assignments and follow through can be a problem. So she was able to address that accommodation as well, and which in fact impacted her child's progress, which has improved since the last time we spoke. The third thing that she was asking for was trying to keep up with the assignments that the student has and knowing those deadlines. And with that, also implemented a quick little agenda system where the student writes the agenda information down and she can go at home and she can check it with the school website to make sure that she was getting that information and having that communication flow between the teachers and her child and the student, which has been very successful. Additionally, the school also implemented an accommodation of providing a hard copy of the notes. So when she got a hard copy of the notes, when her child brought those copies of the notes home, she was able to look at the agenda, compare the notes with what was on the school's website. She was provided an incentive to her child for following through and making sure that they wrote those agenda items. So with having that hard copy of notes, comparing with the school and collaborating with the school, and then looking at the agenda, she was able to see those assignments to make sure that assignments were being completed and that the student was building those healthy habits and advocating to make sure that they're keeping track of their work with the school, and the school is accountable, but she's accountable as a parent, and that the child is accountable in making sure that everything aligned with the copies of notes. So that was a meeting that I prepped the parent for and gave her some information and prepared her, and the outcome was positive. If you need any advice or support, feel free to email me or contact me and ask your question, and I will be glad to read the question on the podcast and answer the question, and your information will remain anonymous. I want to use this platform to support fellow educators and families with questions that you may have as you try to navigate the process of individual education plans, Section 504 plans, or trying to obtain services. Reach out to me at edufaithforall@gmail.com, and I hope to help support you on this podcast platform. Now let's shift to our words of wisdom and our quote for today. And the first one comes from Benjamin Franklin, and it reads, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." The second quote I want to leave you with is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And that is from Nelson Mandela. And as I reflect on the knowledge, attending the conference, the purpose of the conference, which is to help grow others professionally and personally and share that knowledge, the purpose of my books, we want to make sure that we do take our time to learn to be better, to invest in our knowledge so we can be a better person daily. And that remember that with an education, and the more we grow our education, education can be a powerful thing for our students and for ourselves. And we can use our education to change the world. I want to encourage you to get essential. Go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to see what Edufaith Educational Services has to offer. I have valuable resources, information, and a blog that you can subscribe to and find out more essential tips and resources. Go to www.edufaithconsulting.com and subscribe to the Edufaith Educational Services page. Get essential. This podcast is brought to you by Edufaith Educational Services. Some services offered through Edufaith Consulting include consulting and advocacy for parents, consulting for educators, leaders, and school districts, college accommodation advocacy, consulting and training, advocacy in supporting individuals with college accommodations at the post-secondary level, as well as university trainings to support individuals with disabilities and services. parent education trainings, college and career coaching for students who are entering the workforce or the post-secondary college setting, business and district professional development and trainings for churches, nonprofits, businesses, districts, and communities, specializing in services for diverse learners, including students with disabilities, interventions under the multi-tier system of support, English speakers of other languages, education and leadership coaching, program development under services under IDEA, Section 504, trainings, diverse learners, and essential tips books. Feel free to go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to view all the services that Edufaith Educational Services. I want to encourage my believers to be blessed. All others, be kind, be well, and be the change. Follow Edufaith on social media. Twitter, EdufaithS. On Instagram, Edufaith 2021. On LinkedIn, Edufaith Educational Services. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting Edufaith Educational Services and the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Subscribe and follow Edufaith Essentials on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, and listen to the Edufaith Essentials podcast on all streaming platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Have a wonderful day and get essential.